I accidentally, there's a few glitches on my end. I
There
want
we
to
go.
welcome everybody back to the world according to Ben Stein. We are joined tonight by political commentator Lindsay Marie, special guest. Welcome back, Lindsay.
Thanks for having me back.
Thank you
We're
for
honored
being
to have you
here.
here.
Of course, Parler's director of outreach, Star Wars aficionado, comic book icon, Remzo Martinez.
Hi, Remzo.
Hey, everyone. It's great to be back. Thank you.
And the other Ben, managing editor of AM Greatness, Ben Boychuk. Welcome, as always, Ben.
You had to think about that for a minute.
I had to think about it because Remzo and you both share the Marvel universe thing
Right.
in common. So,
Very good.
And of course, Nixon Trivia King historian, Mr. Esoteric himself.
Why am I not the Nixon Trivia King since I worked for Nixon and knew him?
Well, because he's read more books.
No, he's read more books about Nixon than I have.
Oh, no,
I prefer.
I haven't.
No,
I
you
prefer-
haven't. But anyways, getting back to it, and of course, America's humble servant, actor, entertainer, Rico Suave, Benjamin Jeremy Stein.
What does Rico Suave mean?
It means you're just so cool. And I want to welcome everybody that's watching on the YouTube feed. I want to thank you for joining us. I want to remind everybody to find us at Parler at Ben Stein, find us on YouTube at The World According to Ben Stein, and find us on Facebook at The World According to Ben Stein. Welcome everybody listening, and we thank you kindly. Thank you. The question tonight we posted is America lost Benjamin Stein. And the reason I post this to you right now is you went through one of the most tumultuous times in American history. Obviously Vietnam, Watergate, all that, and I think of that song by Johnny Cash, Ragged Old Flag, and it seemed to have made it through. And are we lost right now?
Not at all. Not even remotely. We are at a bad place in terms of political power structure. We were sold a bill of goods by the Democrats who told us they were going to change things. They never specified what they were going to change. All they really wanted to do was get Trump out of there. Why they dislike Trump, that was a psychological thing that I don't understand. Nobody I know has ever been able to explain it. But in terms of running the country any differently or acting as if it's in crisis, it's not in crisis. We have this COVID thing. We've got the vaccine, thanks to Mr. Trump, entirely thanks to him, and a miracle by Mr. Trump. He really should get whatever is the highest prize imaginable for that. And we'll pass through this COVID thing and we'll go on to bigger and better things. There will be crises. The education system in this country is in a state of total shambolic collapse, total, utter, absolute collapse. It's getting worse, not better. The crime situation in some parts of the country is very, very bad. It's getting worse, not better. But the country is basically a wonderful, wonderful place to live. All these people from all over the world want to come here. They'll risk life and limb to come here. It's a great, great country. We're not facing anywhere near the problems we faced in World War II. We're not facing anywhere near the problems we faced in the Civil War, not even close. We have lost our way. Yes, we have allowed the media and the media's pig power structure to take over, but they're not taking over much. Wall Street is still running things. I mean, basically, the country has been run since at least the First World War by Wall Street, and it's still run by Wall Street. So that it's going to keep on being run by Wall Street. That's the way it is. We have a civil religion in this country. It's worship of money, and it's going to keep on being that.
So that didn't sound too hopeful, but thank you.
It's hopeful we have money.
I'm not feeling that hopeful right now. And Lindsay Marie, you being one of the most recent graduates from college, do you see a change? Are you hopeful?
Yeah, I am hopeful. I think a lot of times when we turn on the TV, things seem terrifying and it's doom and gloom, and you think that your neighbor's the worst person in the world based on what they're telling you on TV. But when you have a situation where things are going terribly wrong, if there's a crisis, a disaster, you rely on your neighbors to help you out. And the community is what actually gets things back together in the right way. If you have a tornado, if you have a hurricane hit, the federal government isn't there as soon as it's done. That's your neighbor. That's the people in the next community that are going to come bring you food. They're going to give you money for a hotel. They're going to help get the tree off your roof. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of the ways with the COVID situation, people making masks, doing their own food banks, offering to homeschool people's children in their backyards, trying anything they can to help their fellow man. And I think that's one thing you really need to pay attention to.
I think that's Evansville, Indiana, darling. My
just
very,
a
very beautiful
disclaimer.
blonde colleague. That is not Los Angeles, California.
And
But
just
God
a-
bless you.
Just a disclaimer, if you are going to send your kids to somebody else's backyard to get homeschooled, do a Google search on them first.
That's very funny.
Remzo,
Very good point.
Remzo, you being the most recent college graduate, and I know the most optimistic about this country, do you see hope? I mean, you recently graduated, obviously, from Liberty, which Lewis has made sure you're never allowed to go back to.
They literally unfollowed me on Twitter after Lewis made a joke 2 weeks ago. That is one of the funniest things this year.
That's terrible, Lewis. What was your joke?
Don't worry about it now.
Yeah,
it's
don't
already
tell the
done.
truth.
It's already done.
He still wants to get back in, but Remzo, how do you see it? Because you were given an education there.
There's many different looks that I could take from this. I could look at from a pure pessimistic rationalist worldview. I could look at it from a Judeo-Christian worldview. I think the one person that has really helped me understand where we are in history is Marcus Aurelius. I've picked up Ryan Holiday's book, The Obstacle is the Way, and in the book he talks about Marcus Aurelius during the Antonine Plague, and I think his words couldn't be more fitting than they are now.
What did he say?
He said that a plague can kill you, but it can only hurt you if it infects your character. And I think whether it's a plague, whether it's a war, whether it's a depression, no matter what it is, challenges will come, and the obstacle in the way is the way. And the only thing that we can control is our reaction to it. So this is just one point in history. The big challenge is that we have to live. So that's what we have to do.
I think that's an excellent point, Ben. It's something they teach us in the 12-step world. All we can control is how we react to things. We have no power over the actions. But let's go to Ben Boychuk, the person that's graduated second in the group to last for this question.
I have a particularly grim outlook on this whole scene, and I think Ben Stein touched on it a little bit. The absolute dire condition of education in the United States. We are supposed to be a self-governing republic. And the purpose of public education is to basically teach people, instruct them on how to govern themselves, give them the skills necessary to be free and independent citizens. And we haven't done that in a very, very long time. And the extent to which people learn what their country is, history and civics having been replaced by social studies. There's something that has taken over the schools over the past 30 years called critical thinking skills. The problem with critical thinking skills is that it's very difficult to think critically if you don't know anything.
Oh, that's very good. That's very good. That's very good. That's very good.
And they've essentially, with the exception of some efforts by the guys like E.D. Hirsch, formerly of the University of Virginia, to push a core knowledge type curriculum. For the most part, what we're getting is a kind of a mishmash of stuff. And so what you don't really have a generation coming of age that knows how to govern themselves very well because they don't know their country very well. And so that worries me a great deal. I worry about my kids, and I worry about the schools that we have around here. I think that's going to be a big problem because if you don't know what your country is, then you're not a citizen anymore. You're a subject.
Very, 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 very good point.
And you also actually brought up a good point, which is lack of parenting skills that have eroded for the better part of the last 40 years. But let's go to the man who graduated between Ben Boychuk and Ben Stein, Lewis Fine.
Graduated to what? I'm not sure. I have a pessimistic outlook on things as well. On the one hand, some of our most elite institutions are harder to gain admission to than ever before. And yet I find it impossible to believe that the incoming class of 2024 or the graduating class of 2021 is the best, the most articulate, the most literate, the most numerate in the history of Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, or any other school, including those two schools that have a foundation in the great books, Columbia and the University of Chicago. The University of Chicago has done away with it almost altogether.
I did not know that. I'm very
Yes.
to hear that. Very sad.
Well, to the extent it exists, it's a slither of what it once was. And to the extent that it endures at Columbia, I don't believe it's anywhere as rigorous as it was when you were an undergraduate. So it's more than being a citizen of this country. It's also having knowledge about the culture, the common culture of this country, where we derive our rights from and by whom, and what unites us: language, history, culture, tradition, institutions. None of those things are stronger today than they were a generation ago, 2 generations ago, 3 to 4 generations ago. You could say it began with the so-called rise of the tenured radicals and worsened from there.
Well, I will let
Louis, I would like to say that is so brilliant. It absolutely blows my brains out. That you're totally right, and I hope that you realize that I was kidding when I was saying things are great. Things are great for the people on Wall Street because they're able to rob the whole country blind, and nobody knows any better any way to stop them because they're also ignorant. And the Democratic Party, this is the richest joke in the world, which is supposed to be the party of the people, is the complete lackey of Wall Street. It's a joke how much they're the lackey of Wall Street. If you read about the upcoming nominees for the top government departments, they're all lackeys of Wall Street. They're very well paid lackeys, but they're all lackeys of Wall Street. The whole country is top leadership have been lackeys of Wall Street for a long time. And the only one who stood up to Wall Street at all was Trump. And they just crushed him, squashed him like a bug with cheating and high tech.
That's a great point. Ben Boychuk, you having children, would you homeschool?
I have a child too. Have you forgotten?
Well, you have an older child,
yes.
But Ben Boychuk and Louis both have children. And I just want to wrap this segment up quickly with do you have faith in the college system, in the educational system, Ben?
No. And in fact, just briefly, my son graduated from high school in the spring. He did not go to start college in the fall. In fact, I encouraged him not to, because I think given the COVID situation, not that I'm concerned for his safety, but rather I think that the college experience is even worse than it was before, and that he would get virtually nothing or very little of any value out of it, sitting on Zoom calls or whatever. And so he got a job. And he's working a minimum wage job doing what amounts to scut work, but it's actually been very good for him. And so he's going to start in the winter semester, and we'll see how that goes. But
where's he going?
He's going to do 2 years at a community college, and then he's going to transfer someplace else, because I think that there's probably
that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, there's way more value in that than doing what I did, which was, and what most of all of us did, which was go to like a 4-year, maybe like a state university. I went to UC San Diego. I mean, I read a lot of good books there, but I wouldn't encourage my kids to follow the path that I took.
And on that note, if you just tuned in, you are listening to The World According to Ben Stein. We're joined tonight by special guest Lindsay Marie, political commentator, of course, Remzo, Ben, Louis, and America's humble servant, the real Ben. And if Ben Boychuk could please tell everybody out there listening where they could find us and all that fun jazz.
I'm as real as it gets, man.
You are as real.
Yeah, so please like us on Facebook at The World According to Ben Stein. If you're watching the program on YouTube for the first time, thank you very much for doing that. Please subscribe, hit the bell in the upper corner, tell your friends, tell your families. Please share that we're here, and then we're having great conversations, and we're having a wonderful time. And above all, follow us on Parler at Ben Stein.
I want to welcome
everybody. Something that only I am allowed to mention, because I'm so old, I don't have much life left, is that this whole education crisis.
Well, Ben, I wanted to bring this up with you, because you brought something up to me today That is, welcome everybody back to the world according to Ben Stein. But you brought something up, and I would venture to guess on this panel, nobody shared the same thing. You said to me that in college and university, you had conservative teachers.
Oh, absolutely.
And professors.
Absolutely, I did. Absolutely, I did. In fact, almost all of them were. And I had the incredible privilege of having in law school some of the great conservative thinkers of all time, and I was unbelievably privileged. Even in college, I was very, very privileged because of family connections. I was allowed to audit a class at Columbia Business School being taught by Milton Friedman. At Yale, was incredibly privileged, unbelievably privileged to have Bob Bork as my teacher for constitutional law. I almost all of my teachers were quite conservative. I would be surprised if there were any that weren't conservative. And in high school, which is now a hotbed of Marxist Bolshevism, all the teachers were very conservative and ultra patriotic.
So what happened?
Well, I was about to start saying that, but you were rudely interrupted.
Very rudely.
You're my pal. You can do anything you want. You can take my heart. You can have my heart's blood. What I was going to say is the school system is so much worse than you think. You have no idea. In many of the large cities of this country, only a very small percentage, under 5%, of the students can read in any meaningful way or do arithmetic in any meaningful way. A very small percentage. It's in big cities like Oakland, Chicago, Boston. It's frightening. It's terrifying. And this is very largely a racial matter. Black people just don't get a decent education. I don't think it's because of the Ku Klux Klan. I don't think it's because of Donald Trump. I don't know what it's because of exactly, but Black people who are capable of learning perfectly well, and just as much as white people, are not learning a goddamn thing. And this is a crime against America because a hell of a lot of the young people in this country are Black, and they're growing up with no skills and no knowledge and no appreciation of what a great country this is. And that is a crime against them and a crime against America.
You're muted.
Lost a connection with
You
you.
raise a great point, and I will let Lewis go because you were in school, Lewis, a little less than recently. Did you have conservative teachers?
Some, but my mother was a New York City school teacher for 33 years, 8 months, started teaching when she graduated at the age of 19 from Hunter College, grew up in the Bronx, and she never taught in an academically rigorous school. She never taught in a safe school.
You
And
and
I
I
believe,
both. Hunter.
right. And my mother's most infamous student was a young Nebuchadnezzar kid who later made a brief career, or attempted a career in the post office before he became a serial killer. I'm of course referring to David Berkowitz, and my mother's good friend at the time, who also taught in the Bronx.
That took a turn.
Was
It always does. It always does.
My mother's good friend at the time, her student, he blossomed well before young David. He was a truant, but on the few times he came to class, his name was Lee Harvey Oswald.
Oh,
so
Okay,
so they still talk about it. So
It's all connected.
the next time a politician, regardless of party, goes to an inner city and talks to constituents, voters, Black, Latino, minorities, and points with one finger and one hand to the abandoned warehouse or factory on behalf of a corporation that left a decade or 20 years ago, and says you were betrayed once by Ford or Chrysler or GM or whatever company that provided a living wage to you because those jobs were exported overseas, but you've been betrayed generation upon generation by your local government, which, to use a phrase that's common among the left, warehouses, it's true in this case, warehouses your children in broken down buildings with broken down curricula, with broken down equipment,
That's all.
creating. No, it's not.
You could
No,
say it
it's
louder.
not.
But
No, it's not. My mother, I could tell you the difference between.
Sir, Lewis, I'm not saying what you're saying is very true. What the politician you're quoting is saying is bullshit. You're totally right.
They're not saying it at all. They're not saying you're being cheated by these schools, and you have no option. You have no option. Maybe 3 of you will be the darlings of an elite private school, a boarding school, one of the members of St. Grottelsex, that will patronize you in every sense of the word and bestow upon you a scholarship and pluck you out of your neighborhood that's filled with crime, drugs, violence, and just wholesale abandonment. But the rest of you will be betrayed from K through 12
by your parents, mostly by your parents.
Okay, so
and the schools.
Lewis, so Ben Boychuk, what about you? Did you have any conservatives?
Sort of. I had some very excellent professors in college. One of whom went to prison briefly for dodging the draft, and another who was basically a New Deal Democrat, and another who was briefly an editor of a libertarian journal, but no real conservative, like dyed in the wool conservatives. But I had excellent professors. The leftists that I liked the most were the ones who would encourage me to come to office hours and argue. And
I know you're Lindsay, for God's sake, she hasn't been allowed to say a word.
Yeah, well, yeah. So yeah, let's throw it to you, Lindsay. What about your instructors?
She's still in school herself.
So I only remember having one professor that wasn't a leftist, pretty much. I had one professor that taught international politics, and she actually fled socialism, and I can't remember what country she came from, but she was always talking about the differences in socialism and capitalism in the United States versus how she grew up as a child. I remember like my constitutional law and Indiana constitutional law professors were all very big Democrats. And so the way that they taught those classes was very distinctly different than what you'd expect a conservative to teach those classes. So I had maybe one out of, I don't know how many professors I ever had, but only one.
How did you stand up to them? How did you get back at them? How did you fight back?
So at the time, ideologically, I wasn't sure what I identified as. I was socially liberal and fiscally conservative. But I also was always taught, and in school, there was only 2 things: Republican, Democrat, nothing else exists. And I was a political science major, and that's what I was taught. They said the word Ross Perot 1 time in 4 years. And so I had no idea of anything beyond that. So I didn't realize till later down the road, looking back, how he taught, that he was such a leftist, and just papers and things I'd write, he would critique them, and it was clearly from an emotional standpoint and from a leftist position.
So let's get next to the one person here who we could almost guarantee had a ton of conservative professors, but fought back in another way, which is Remzo.
I'm pretty sure I was the token liberal at Liberty. It was pretty funny. I graduated from the Helm School of Government, fantastic school. I had amazing teachers. My political economy, constitutional history and law course, public policy and drafting classes were some of the most impactful classes I had. And not to be too pitchy, but I actually write about it in my first book, Stay Away from the Libertarians, a look at the modern libertarian movement. But growing up, I had kind of an awkward education system. I was homeschooled, private schooled, and public schooled off and on, just depending on where we were living, because I grew up in an active military family. And even though I was culturally conservative, the one teacher who impacted me more than anyone else was a very liberal man. I won't say his name online, but he was my English composition teacher. He gave me a D my first quarter, and he looked at me and he said, "You have so much more potential." And later, I not only graduated the year with a A in the class, the highest grade in the class, but I also exceeded the entire graduating class of the AP exams. And it's because he told me to think as an individual. He said, "I don't care what you say, as long as you say it, you believe it, you can prove it." And that man did more for me than anybody else. And, you know, on kind of a side note, he also instilled in me a love of writing, which impacted my life. So I think with
Liberty's a great place. Liberty is a really exceptionally great.
Yeah, I mean, Liberty was nice, but I was not really loved by my teachers. Let's put it that way.
It's a great place.
So
yeah,
Ben,
I mean, I liked it.
So Ben Stein, I have a question for you. You taught at American University, and you
I had a great time there, boy.
And you taught at UC Santa Cruz. So you and Lewis both have an association with a mass murderer that we learned in the show. You, Big Ed Kemper, Lewis, the son of Santa. But when you were a teacher there, and obviously you were conservative, what were most of the staff like by that time?
All left it. All 100%.
So in that brief
my girlfriend Pat, a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful young woman. Now she's not so young anymore, but anyway, she and I and one guy who was a Vietnam vet, out of all the votes on campus in the 72 election, we were the only votes for Nixon. Every single other one was for that jerk McGovern.
So you were teaching in '67, right?
No, sir. I was still at Yale Law School as a student, 67 to 70. I started teaching in 71 at American U, and then I started teaching in 72 at UC Santa Cruz.
So that's like a 3-year difference between student and teacher.
Right.
And you couldn't, in your university, or in American University, you couldn't find one conservative.
No, not sir. No. I think perhaps I misspoke. American University, I didn't know any of those teachers, not a single one. I never met them. It wasn't that they were mean to me or shunned me. I just never met them. But at UC Santa Cruz, I knew many of them, and they were all extreme leftists. And right now, UC Santa Cruz is just choking, blood spattered, choking with communists.
Beautiful campus.
The best, most beautiful campus in the world. When I was there, now it's grown by a factor of 10 since I was there, so I don't know what it looks like now.
I haven't been on the grounds, but I have a thing for college campuses.
By the way, I'm sure some of the co-eds wouldn't agree at that time it was the best campus to be on.
What, the one who was murdered by Mr. Kemper?
Yes.
Was he the one strangling people in the bushes?
No, he was the one that cut their heads off.
He strangled them too, raped and strangled. He was a very sick, horrible, awful person
who hated his mother. And
people who strangle people. I was with you up until that.
And if you just tuned in, you are listening to The World According to Ben Stein. We're trying to bring some humor into the world tonight on this Thursday night, and hope and optimism, and that it's not all lost. And if you just joined in on YouTube, thank you for listening. Post some questions for Ben. I'll ask one from, have you ever met Ross Perot, by the way?
No, I have not. I did not
ever meet him, because he sadly recently passed away. Ben Boychuk, can you please tell people where they could find us?
Well, if you're on Facebook, please like us at The World According to Ben Stein. You can find the audio version of this podcast on all sorts of platforms, including iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and 3 or 4 others that I always forget. And certainly make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. And most importantly of all, thank you for following us on Parler at Ben Stein.
I want to welcome everybody back to The World According to Ben Stein. Ben, so I have this question for you, and I'll probably get killed for asking this because people will call me a commie liberal, but Lewis brought it up. You brought it up about how bad the educational system is. I think we've lost a generation of African Americans. I think we've just lost a generation, and we really have to focus on the next generation. And I've never understood why public schools end at 3:00 in the afternoon. I don't understand why there aren't mandated school uniforms, and I don't understand why they don't have 3 meals a day and a nurse or a doctor on staff. Because I believe if you have those 4 things from the ground up, the people will be far better off, Ben.
It's certainly worth a try, because what we're doing now isn't working at all. And I think you're being very generous to say it's only one generation we've lost. I mean, the situation for African American youth in this country is just terrible. It's just terrible. And I must say, I do not blame the establishment for what that is for doing it, except for the Democratic establishment, which endlessly lies them and says we're going to fix it for you, and they never ever do. They don't. The biggest lie in America is that the Democratic Party really gives a goddamn about black people.
That's putting it mildly. What about you, Ben Boychuk? I see you ready to chime in.
There's some really interesting observations in the chat of the YouTube live stream. I've been keeping one eye on it. And Ghost Runner just made a point about charter schools. So in a previous life, I spent a good deal of time covering school reform and school reform efforts everywhere. And there is no one particular piece of legislation or silver bullet. Charter schools can be great. They can also be terrible. You could abolish the teachers' unions tomorrow and you would still have a disaster on your hands because the curriculum is so bad. And so, school choice is great.
Why don't we blame the parents, for Christ's sake?
So that, yes. So, right. So ultimately, the best education you're really going to get is at home. I mean, your parents should not defer.
If I may respectfully say this, very respectfully, my father, a genuine genius, used to say all the time, there has never been an education system so bad that a well-motivated, hardworking student willing to read could not get a good education.
Yeah. And that's it. That's really it. Yeah. Louis Fine.
Louis Farrakhan.
Thank you. Yes, I just had my bean pie and I will be enjoying it many times later this evening. The difference today is this. There is no affordable access to the grammar of American culture and the literature of American history, by which I mean movie palaces. During the Great Depression, people went to the movies. They couldn't afford much, but they could afford a movie ticket. COVID-19, if nothing else, has eviscerated the existence of movie theaters. Movie palaces don't exist anymore, except here and there. We talked about this on a previous show concerning the Uptown in Washington, D.C. But if you wanted to have a sense of culture, popular culture, and some immortal forms of American art, including one of Benjamin Stein, our doctor's favorite films, Casablanca, you went not just to the movies, you went to movie palaces. And you also had the Carnegie Public Libraries. There was a billionaire, a real life billionaire, who didn't just endow or finance the construction of libraries. They were architecturally palaces. Clarence Thomas, to bring this full circle in terms of someone who is a person of color, grew up in the segregated South. English was not his first language because he grew up speaking a dialect of, he grew up in Savannah, and I forget, it begins with a G, so you'll have to beg my pardon. But his one escape from everything, and he came from a dysfunctional family. He was raised by his maternal grandfather, was the library. If you don't have access to books, you don't have access to culture, you can't go to museums, you can't do any of these things. And the presumption is, well, if we're on lockdown, you can at least go online and do these things. If you're poor and you don't even have a computer, and it's presumptuous to assume that someone who is poor does have a computer and can go online and do these things, well, you're in a lot of trouble, none of which is your own.
Thank you.
May I respectfully say that Abraham Lincoln did not have a computer. William Shakespeare did not have a computer. I mean, there are an awful lot of great people who did not.
He had access to books.
So do today's young people. They have access to books. Their parents don't teach them to do it. And they learn in their groups that you're acting white and you're acting out, not acting black. If you read and educate yourself, the culture of Black America is so anti-intellectual, it's terrifying.
Let's get to Lindsay Marie.
Not sure which one to respond to right now. The one thing that I think keeps popping up is the idea of literacy. And the one thing people overlook is that the majority of people in prison have a reading level of third grade or below. 85% of juvenile offenders have trouble reading. There's clearly a distinction and a correlation between literacy rates and what ends up happening later down the road. There's an idea of the prison or the school to prison pipeline. And that's a very real thing. I think we need to talk about not only people finding good jobs and having a successful career, but also keeping them out of these bad places and making bad choices. And if you can allow someone, if you can give someone the gift of teaching them to read, or if they teach themselves to read, if you can read, you can do pretty much anything, because you can teach yourself to cook, you can read recipe, you can read books on how to repair things. Once you can read, your potential is nearly limitless. And the biggest thing now is making sure that kids actually can read by the time that they're leaving certain grades, and that when they go down, once they're graduated, they can actually form sentences, write what they need to write resumes, and get jobs, and also be successful in life.
They have to want to learn.
But Ben, you've written tons. Ben Stein, you've written tons of pieces for this about for the spectator.org, about the literacy in Chicago, the literacy, which is, if you could speak about that.
Terrifying. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I mean, the catastrophe among Black young people in this country is unbelievable. It's just absolutely unbelievable. It's as if there's some horrible enemy country had decided to kill America, and they're doing it. But it isn't that. We're doing it to ourselves.
Remzo.
I think one of the most influential and probably one of the most impactful Americans, human beings maybe, is Kanye West. And Kanye basically said that when he was going to school that he was bored, and his mother realized it. So the first thing she did was she pulled him out and she got him tutors, and he learned how to design clothes, and they learned music. And whether you love Kanye West or not, his music has touched billions of people around the world. Part of me almost wished that Kanye won and was president, but so sad. Kanye 2024. Either way, though, what he realized early on was that he wasn't going to get any type of satisfaction, and he wasn't going to get any type of change in his life by following the same routines as everybody else. And honestly, I applaud the collapse of the American education system right now, because it's been broken for years. It was broken under Republican administrations. It was broken under Democrat administrations. What we need to do is stop telling people what to do and give them the ability to choose themselves. It might not always be clear. It might be hard. It might sometimes not be socially acceptable. But when you allow people to actually explore the ideas and the thoughts that actually interest them, it's amazing what can happen.
They've had that choice. They've had that chance. They throw it away. They don't care to follow it. The culture in the Black community is extremely flawed.
I just want to bring up something, because there's really a thin line between a nanny state and a non-nanny state. So everybody here knows what your first day of school is like. It's the most important day every year of your first day of school, right? So I was a little pleasantly plump. I never felt comfortable, and I never had the right clothing. So always on day one, I was a step back.
Why did you not have the right clothing?
Well, because I wasn't cool enough. My mother, I had, shared, clothing with hand-me-downs from cousins. But my point being is, when kids go to school and they feel out of place on day one, that is a huge thing. And I think some of us, Ben Boychuk, I think it is important to push them further.
Oh, well, sure. One of the dilemma that we have, and I see some of this coming up in the chat too, which has just been really fun and fascinating to watch. We make the point about bad parents and where are they? We're talking about the Black family. We're talking about families that are badly broken, where there is really often only one parent. They're working
almost always.
Almost all. Yeah. I mean, it's the out of wedlock birth rate is unbelievably high.
70%.
Yeah.
Over 70%.
It's over 70. And so, you have profound disadvantages just from there. And who's going to fill in? The state? There is one public policy remedy, and I wanted to mention it, but it's much easier said than done, and that is it would be a very good thing if there was some political will to get rid of the U.S. Department of Education, which has no business existing and is probably unconstitutional. But you know,
Probably.
well, okay, that almost certainly is. But nobody's been able to do it. Ronald Reagan tried to do it, and he failed. Joe Scarborough, when he was in Congress as a Republican from Florida, had a bill to do it, and he failed. There's just the damn thing continues to grow and become, you know, a bigger and bigger monster by the year, no matter who's in charge. But getting rid of, you know, vastly curtailing the federal government's role in education would be very helpful.
Well,
But
I will tell you what. Somebody here mentioned Kanye West. I believe it was our friend Remzo, and I think he has hit the nail closest to the head, or right on the head. If there were more Black role models who said it's cool to learn things, it's cool to have a job, it's cool to be self-supporting, that would make a big difference. I had the extraordinary privilege many, many years ago of being a ghostwriter for Jesse Jackson. And Jesse Jackson and I spent quite a lot of time together. And I went and listened to him talk to a lot of Black groups. And he would say to young Black people, you go demonstrate against inequality. You go demonstrate against racism. I'll be right there in the front of the march with you. But if you learn how to be a plumber or how to be an electrician or how to put on a roof, you will always be in the middle class. You can feed your family and be proud of yourself your whole life. That's what you need to do.
And
We
just
need
for the
more like him, more like him.
And by the
He's
way,
a great man.
Before I get to Lewis, you bring up a great point, but there are the Larry Elders of the world.
He's great. Larry Elder's great.
They're the Leo Terrells, but they're called Uncle Toms if they ever speak out.
Nobody's calling Jesse Jackson Uncle Tom.
I didn't say Jesse Jackson. I'm saying the current day ones. They're considered traitors and sellouts if they actually question. They are. It's just a fact. And Lewis, your thoughts on this? Because
Larry Elder hasn't made a living off of exploiting that stereotype that's used against him. I can tell you this, I can think of no better role model than a bipolar high school dropout who was fired by the Gap, who happens to be African American. Kanye West is on the wall of my living room, and he's next to a painting of Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, John Kennedy, and Robert Kennedy. And I grew up looking at that man's face, and I said, forget Frederick Douglass, this is the way forward. The allegory of Plato's cave. If you are 11 years old and you're living in an inner city, I don't care if you're a poor white, a poor Black, or a poor Latino. If there is no library, there is no movie palace, they've been decimated or razed entirely. And what you grow up seeing is violence. You hear it. You hear the gunshots. You hear the police sirens and first responders. And that is your world. And you go, and were you to take a bus 10 miles west or east in any other direction, and you're in a high affluent community, it's as if you landed on Mars. This idea that, well, you were given choices. What choices?
Frederick Douglass was an effing slave, Lewis, and he went on to be one of the great thinkers of America. There are people.
I'm talking about today.
Today, had incredibly bad environments and went on to be incredible inspirations. You don't have to give people a movie palace in order to make them think.
Talking about culture and libraries, and Frederick Douglass had access to books.
Okay, this is what happens when you insult Kanye.
And on this note, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The World According to Ben Stein. Lewis is advocating.
No, go to Appalachia. Tell me about the white poor. And
Lewis is advocating for more movie theaters across America.
I agree.
No.
I'm kidding around. And if you just tuned in, you are listening to The World According to Ben Stein. Ben Boychuk, can you please tell people where they can find us?
Yes. Thank you for tuning in to the show. If you just tuned in, well, you missed a doozy. Please subscribe to the channel, hit that bell in the upper corner, tell your friends, because you never really know what's going to happen on the program. Like us on Facebook at The World According to Ben Stein. You can find the audio version of this show on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and other fine podcast hosting platforms. And above all, most importantly, tell your friends about us on Parler and follow us at Ben Stein.
I want to welcome everybody back to the world according to Ben Stein. And we said this segment could be Ask Ben Anything. So by the way, Ben, somebody brought up, his name is Matthew Owens. He said, hello, Ben Stein. Barron and I went with you to the RNC in 2006.
Oh yeah, we had a lot of fun. Was it 2006 or 2004? I think it was 2004.
Yeah, it had to be 2004. So you guys went together in 2004. So if you guys have questions in this section for Ben,
a lot of fun.
Wojcik will gladly read them. And of course, I know Lewis is actually raising a good point, which is about culture, right? We have a loss of culture in this country. We have a
aspirational.
Yeah.
From architecture to popular culture to everything. That's the difference between now and then. You could be in a poor neighborhood and live in a tenement, and the architecture of the building, rat infested and roach infested though it may have been, was probably better designed from an aesthetic point of view than today's $3,000 a month cookie cutter studio in downtown Los Angeles.
Lindsay, how did you escape all of this, in Indiana? I won't say where you are, and become such a successful young woman.
Oh, thank you. First of all, the thing that's funny is when you brought up school and not fitting in and how that can kind of make things awkward and make you struggle like long term. In high school, like I didn't fit in at all. I hated it. The high school I went to, if you weren't in sports or band, the teachers kind of just ignored you because they didn't really see that much value in you. And so I graduated high school early to get the hell out and to go on and like start my own life. And so I doubled up on classes, went to school in the summer so that I could be in college way sooner than I should have been. And I think it was that drive of like, at first it was resentment, like wanting to get out. And then in college, like I look back, the stuff that I use every day now in jobs I have, it never came from college. It was because it was stuff that I read in my own research I did on my own. And so like I have a very expensive piece of paper, but it didn't really get me anything other than being able to check off a box.
And thank you for that. And Ben, somebody wants to know if you can sing.
Yes, but I'm not.
Oh, we know that.
If you've heard me sing, let's sing now.
Sing me the Negro spiritual.
The old boss. Okay, that's my sing.
And if anybody's wondering,
I can sing Lift Every Voice. That's how black I am.
That's what shall we say?
Louis Fine are shared by Louis Fine. Ben Wojcik, are there any more questions coming in?
Yes. All right, Ben. So Judah beat me to the singing question. Has Ben Stein ever had a mustache, goatee, or beard? And is there photographic evidence of such?
Yes, I've never had a goatee, but I had a mustache and a beard. I was a hippie, man. I was a cool hippie. I was a very cool hippie.
We actually posted a picture of him.
I was very thin too.
Of you and your wife. That amazing picture that people.
My wife is a goddess.
Yeah.
With the fro.
With the fro. Ben, keep going.
This one's a kind of an interesting one, and it will cast back to Win Ben Stein's money. Did you and Jimmy Kimmel ever talk or argue about politics?
It became apparent fairly early that he and I did not share the same political views. We never argued about it. I've never argued with him about anything. I mean, I'm delighted to see his success. I obviously couldn't possibly disagree with him more about domestic politics, probably foreign politics if I ever heard him talk about that. But God bless him. He's an incredibly talented guy, and God bless him.
I will ask this. Have you ever smoked a cigarette, Ben?
Oh, yes. I started smoking in junior high. And here's the great thing. In those days, a pack of cigarettes was $0.25, and it was great, too. And I smoked it. My smoking buddy was Carl Bernstein, my next-door neighbor, and I smoked until I smoked very, very little, just a couple of cigarettes a day. And then I stopped completely in my 30s. I'm very, very glad I stopped. I did have a very close friend who was a smoker, and he and my wife used to sit outside our house smoking, and I would plead with them to stop, and they finally did.
I'll ask one more. Have you ever had a cup of coffee?
No, never tasted coffee in my life, and I don't ever intend to.
They wrote a novel about that.
You're kidding.
Memoir from Ant Proof Case by Mark Halperin. It's an amazing novel.
He's a very talented guy.
He is. He is.
So, but I want to get back to something important, and you, I still something I can't understand, Ben, is 3 o'clock ending of schools. Why are
your
It's
prescription?
farmers. It's from the
I get it.
agricultural
Louis, I
age.
understand why, but nobody's tilling the land right now in South Side of Chicago. Kids need to be in school until 5 or 6 at night, and I hate to say it, but we have to do some of the parenting as a country because it's not being. This isn't just about inner cities.
We need to get rid of child labor laws. Those kids need to go to work.
That's a very, very, very good idea, Ramsey. That's a very good idea.
What? But it's correct. What it used to be is
Totally
McDonald's, working at McDonald's was meant to be a starter job. It wasn't meant to be a finishing job.
It's a great idea. When I was a young person, which was a very long time ago, all the people at McDonald's were young, white, American high school kids or college kids. Now it's all foreigners. What are those young white kids doing? I guess they're home smoking dope. If my observation of young white kids today is correct.
Okay, here's one that's very interesting, and I think you could answer this. We've discussed this. Why do people love Karl Marx? And I think a lot of it could be
Jealousy,
attributed.
envy, and jealousy. Karl Marx wrote Capital. He was a genius, no two ways about it. He wrote it because he was a Jewish man in Germany, part of a family, most of whom were very rich industrialists. He hated them because he was not rich. So he wrote a whole gigantic book about how history all pointed to these people becoming the masters of the universe, and they are thoroughly evil, horrible people who needed to be overthrown. And it was a way of expressing his envy of his rich relatives.
Here's an easy one that I know the answer to. Have you ever smoked weed? That's the least of.
That's the least of. I didn't like weed that much. It was rough on my throat. Drugs, yes, lots. But weed, I never liked very much.
Okay, so now I'm curious. So we're all having this. Louis, what was your first job?
This show. I want to say something about Abraham Lincoln.
Can you answer the question?
My first job, you know what? It was my town library, which was a former residence. I grew up in a town of 10,000.
I thought you
And
grew up in New York. You just told us you grew up.
no, my mother grew up in the Bronx.
Oh.
And she went to Evander Child and then to Hunter College, and she graduated at 19. Abraham Lincoln was an incredibly literate man, and his mother passed away when he was a young boy, and the sense of literacy and knowledge and advancement was inculcated so strongly in him that whenever his father saw him reading, he beat the crap out of him. And I'm not joking. He thought he conflated it with laziness and idleness, and that it was a waste of time. And it was Lincoln's stepmother who took a liking to him and mentored him and made sure he got the hell out of the woods.
But may I say to you something I often say to my dear friend Judah? There are such things as anecdotes, and there are such things as data. And you've just given us an interesting anecdote.
Read his own letters.
Okay, Louis, Ben Boychuk, what was your first job?
Oh, my first job was working I was running the student store on my high school campus, and I got paid for it. So that was a real job. So it was only a few hours a week, but I had to deal with miscreants and learn how to, rebuff idiots.
By the way, for the record, I went to high school in Washington Heights, and so we went from Brooklyn to Washington Heights every day. School ended at 6 o'clock, and I got out at 7:30. It limited, thank God, the amount of trouble I was able to get into. And I say limited. What about you, Lindsay? What was your first job?
Either lifeguard, or I also worked at a library around the exact same time.
I like how Ben's eyes perked up when you said lifeguard.
I have a very beautiful swimming pool. I could use a lot.
I'm drowning.
Yes, exactly.
Ben wants you to be on his other end of the life alert.
Exactly.
What about you, Remzo? You've had so many.
My first one, I was an announcer for all freshmen and JV sports at my high school.
Oh, that's very cool.
In English?
I know, right?
By the way, what was it like to integrate Liberty?
¿Por qué?
Okay, I want people to know. So here's, because I know Ben, I know he's had some very interesting jobs. One of them, he sold shoes.
That's right. That was what was my first paying jobs were being a gardener in the neighborhood and also washing people's cars in the neighborhood. But the first job I had outside the neighborhood was selling shoes at a place called the Shoe Giant, which was a large shoe store catering mostly to African Americans in Prince George's County, Maryland. And I had a great time doing it. I loved it. And after only about a week doing it, I was offered a better job working at the Civil Service Commission as a statistician, and I did that instead. But I must say, I greatly, greatly enjoyed being a shoe salesman at the Shoe Giant.
So you were a shoe salesman for 1 week?
Yes, 1 week. And I liked that 1 week a lot. The best job I ever had was being a ticket taker and event putter honor at Yale Law School for the Yale Law School Film Society. That was incredible fun, unbelievable fun.
And so you have had a bunch of, and the reason I I wanted to bring this up is because
we haven't asked Lewis what his first job
is. He did. He worked at a library.
No, he was kidding about that.
No, he was being serious. He got all the free library books he could get. And the reason I actually want to bring this up is because Lewis, actually getting back to his culture thing, we started the show with "Is There Hope?" And I think the lack of humor in today's world and the lack of comedy, Ben, is sort of we all used to be able to tune into a late night show and laugh, no matter what party we were from. We don't have that anymore.
No, we don't. You're absolutely right. And that is a very, very good point. That is a very good point. The Bolshevik point of view has taken over even late night. It is really as my wife would say, heart-rendering.
And I'd like to bring this up too, because people on whatever they're on, there's no humor. Everybody just, Ben Boychuk said to me, Lewis said to me, everybody just reads the top 3 lines. Nobody ever digs in anymore. We've lost the ability to read a whole essay or a whole thing. And I mean, I'll ask Lindsay that, you're right too. I know. Do people dig in? Does your generation still dig?
I don't really think so. And I think that's why one-liner jokes typically work better on Twitter than if you post an op-ed, because people don't care to actually read all of it. They just want the quick little synopsis. And you're right. I think that the left has a monopoly on comedy, and especially late night shows. There is not one single late night show host that is remotely even centrist, I would say. And which is really sad, because it kind of leaves a large portion of the country out of the fun every night when people used to love to watch those shows. Now it's nothing but like a political, basically rant fest.
And the wonderful thing about it is that job makes all the people who do it rich. When I first met Jimmy Kimmel, I was the rich one. Now I'm the beggar. Now I'm the welfare mother. It's very funny.
And Ben, one more question. Was there ever a contestant on the show that stood out to you? I'm sure many did.
Ken Jennings.
Was he on my show? I don't remember.
Yes.
Did I beat him or did he beat me? Did he beat me? Probably beat me. Did he beat me? Probably.
He's not being serious. Ken Jennings wasn't on Win Ben Stein's Money, but somebody asked it seriously. So.
No, I had a number of very good contestants, and I will say something. It's going to be controversial, but I had several African American contestants who were very hard contestants, and it was a real job beating them.
And that just made up for the whole hour beforehand.
And I what that has taught me is, with proper motivation, they are capable of every single other thing that whites or Asians or anybody else is capable of. And somehow it's a tragedy of our era is they're not properly motivated. They could do so much. They are America's greatest untapped natural resource.
But with respect, you did have them beaten before they came on stage.
And on that note,
that's absolutely outrageous.
Well, it is Louis Fine. And on that note, Louis, thank you for ending it on a high note, as always. I want to thank political commentary Lindsay Marie for being here tonight from the Seinfeld set, which people were curious about. It's not the Friends set.
I didn't have them beaten. I meant I answered more questions correctly.
You had them corrected.
Okay, and I want to thank, of course, Parlor's Director of Outreach, Remzo Martinez. If everybody's views on
What
the show
what
are
mental
their
hospital
own.
did we get Lewis from?
Everybody,
Seriously, what
St. Elizabeth's.
everybody's views.
That's not in business anymore.
Okay,
Well, they let me out.
everybody's views are their own. Lindsay, thank you. Lululemon thanks you. The Seinfeld set thanks you. Ben Boychuk, managing editor of AM Greatness. You could be found on Parlor at that tricky name. Please say
Yes, find me on Parlor at BBOYCHUK3 and check out American Greatness. American Greatness is on Parlor too, but I forget our handle right now. But go to the
Damn
website.
greatness.
Is it? Thanks.
Yeah, good job.
Check out the website at www.amgreatness.com.
And of course, you could find Louis Fine at L Fine on Parlor. You could find Remzo Martinez at Remzo. And you can find Ben Stein at Ben Stein, and also spectator.org. Read his daily diaries. They are great. I want to thank everybody out there.
Let's thank you, Judah.
And that's right. I am at Judah Friedman. And I want to thank everybody on YouTube for listening to us tonight. I believe almost all the past shows are up on our podcast, so please tell people to download them. You could find us on Facebook, which Ben Boychuk so graciously manages, at The World According to Ben Stein. You can find us on YouTube at The World According to Ben Stein. You can find us everywhere. Tell people, no matter, even if they don't like us, tell them to listen to us.
Did you give a shout out for Lindsay?
And
Lindsay. I have
saved
on every show.
I saved the best for last. You could find Lindsay Marie at Parlor at, what's your handle?
Lindsay Marie. No thrills.
So Ben Boychuk's the only confusing one in the group. I want to thank everybody out there for listening. Have a great, safe night, and we will see you very soon. I want to thank, of course, America's humble servant, Benjamin Jeremy Stein, as always. Sir, thank you.